There's a long-running conflict with the Chinese Communist Party. The students know exactly what they're doing. They're fighting for their lives. I just have a few more things to say. Thank you to everyone who've organized this forum. Thank you for inviting me. And my support to Senator Leila de Lima. Freedom for de Lima now, 5 demands, not 1 less.
Our next message of solidarity is from a champion of press freedom and human rights, considered to be the most radical politician during her election to the Hong Kong Legislative Council, where she served from 1998 to 2006. She was also the chairperson of the Hong Kong Democratic Party from 2012 to 2016. Friends, Emily Lau.
Dreams of progress, our visions gone mad.
Hello, this is Emily Lau from London. Sorry I cannot join your forum because I'm here meeting with government officials and civil society about Hong Kong. But of course, I care a lot about the plight of Senator de Lima. So I would just want to make a video presentation as my contribution. And the first point you want me to address is whether Hong Kong people's respect for the rule of law has changed after the months of protest. And I can assure you, fundamentally, it has not changed. Many of us still have confidence in the people's respect for the rule of law and, most importantly, in the independence of the judiciary. But of course, I don't think I'm ignoring the pressure, the very heavy pressure from Beijing and from the Hong Kong powers that be on our judges. But I think by and large, they will hold up. We respect them, the legal fraternity respect them, and I hope the protesters will respect them, because the rule of law is the fundamental basis for Hong Kong's existence. It should never be destroyed. There have been many cases of excessive police brutality against the protesters, some of which are very, very young members, including secondary school students. So the question that you ask is whether we can expect something from the justice system which will give them accountability so that justice will be seen to be served. And of course, right now, more than 7,000 protesters have been arrested, but not a single police officer has been arrested. And people feel very, very aggrieved. That's why we are demanding an independent commission of inquiry, not just to target the police, but to look at the whole saga. And we will continue to push, and we hope our friends in the international community, including those in London here, will support us, and I hope the demand will be met. Some people have asked whether the thousands of protesters who have been arrested will get due process. I certainly think so, I hope so, and the legal fraternity in Hong Kong are very, very adamant that they should get due process. But of course, it's dragging on for quite a while because of such a huge backlog. And the courts are trying to arrange extra sessions to deal with all these cases. And of course, some of them should not be charged at all. So we certainly hope the authorities in Hong Kong will handle them quickly. But as I said, if we still have the rule of law, then I think these people will get due process. And I think I hope the whole process will proceed much more quickly. Today, your forum is on lawfare, meaning the people in power use the law as a weapon against its political opponents to silence them, and in the case of the senator, to lock her up unjustly for 3 years. And we see elements of that in Hong Kong. There have been accusations of politically motivated prosecutions. So this is something we're aware of and we're very concerned. So what we need to do is to sensitize the whole community and particularly the legal profession must speak out, and our politicians, they should speak out, and of course the people, they should speak out too. And we have done so many times by marching in huge numbers. And this is something that we will continue to do, to fight against lawfare. And I hope that people in the Philippines will also do that, not just to help Senator De Lima, but to ensure that your system will not be used by evil politicians against the people. Finally, I want to pay tribute to Senator De Lima, who has been unjustly locked up on trumped-up drugs charges for 3 years. This is totally intolerable and unacceptable. I have traveled to your country to try to help her, and I will continue to do my best. And the senator's courage and bravery is respected and admired, not only by people in the Philippines, but by people in the international community. And her courage is an inspiration to us, the fact that she will never give up. And we will never give up too. I would like to work with you, people of the Philippines, and members of the international community to ensure an early release for the senator. And of course, the people of the Philippines, must work hard to ensure that you really have the rule of law and that the authorities will not use lawfare as a weapon against you and your children. This is Emily Lau from Hong Kong. All the very best to you.
The message is loud and clear. We should never give up. And for our last plenary session, Combating Lawfare Strategies and Responses, I would like to introduce our moderator. She has been at the forefront of peace initiatives in the Philippines. She co-founded and serves as chair, convener of the Women's Coalition Every Woman. She currently chairs the International Center on Innovation, Transformation, and Excellence in Governance inside Gov. Friends, please welcome Secretary Teresita Ging Quintos Deles.
Sweat innocent blood, demolition men rumble through Smoky Mountain homes. Darkness indeed, justice dressed in gloom.
Magandang hapon po. Good afternoon. Congratulations to everyone who's here. It means who's still here, after what has been a long but very full and I think very exciting day. Di ho ba? Yes. Pagod na ho ba kayo? Hindi pa. Okay, sana ho yung iba na naglalakad pa ay papasok para hindi ho masyadong maginaw, di ba? We need more people to share the cold to make us warm. So we are at the fourth and last panel, the most awaited panel. Dahil nga ho, this is the last panel. It brings to a close, a logical closing point, the very informative, enlightening, lively discussions that have happened through the morning, where we looked at and tried to understand ano nga ba itong ibig sabihin nitong lawfare na ito. No? Partly law, pero partly warfare. Ano nga ba ibig sabihin yan? And what is really going on? Not just here in the country where we have our very primary example, Senator Laila de Lima, but many other cases, but also in other parts of the world. So it has been truly an international forum, bringing in the experiences of others. And now we come to the fourth and last panel, which is very important because it talks about combating lawfare, strategies and responses. Importante po na yung ating pag-uusap ay mauuwi at tututok. So ano na? Ano ba ang gagawin natin dito? Importante po ito because we don't like to be the person that we all know so well, na matapang lang magsalita pero wala namang magawa. No? Importante na yung lumalaban sa lawfare, those of us who are fighting, who are defending democracy. Hindi lang tayo dada ng dada, hindi lang intindi ng intindi, kung hindi gumagawa. So this is the panel now. So again, congratulations and thank you to all who have stayed up to this point and who will stay on and on and on, right? Hindi magtatapos dito. So we have for our panel, our last panel, we have two speakers or presenters, one of whom will be presenting through a video. So ipakikilala ko siya mamaya. And then we have two reactors who are both here. Okay? So pakikilala natin, and as we introduce them, I ask them to please come up and take their seat. So, okay, so as I said, we have two panel speakers or presenters. The first through a video, pakikilala ko mamaya, pero siya si Richard Anderson Falk, na taga-Amerika po, no? I'll give more of an introduction later. But the second one, who is right here, is Dr. Walden Bello, who is a balikbayan, who has spent much of his work and continues to spend a lot of time abroad, but who has been able to and continues to engage hindi ho ako kakanta. Engage very meaningfully and very actively in shaping the discourse about democracy, about economic sovereignty, about what it is to be a Filipino facing the challenges of these times. He is, we know him first as a writer, an academic, a public intellectual, but who is is even more notable because he has dared to cross the line to political work, actually serving in the House of Representatives as a representative of the Akbayan party list from 2009 to 2015. Today, he is based, his main work base, I have to say, in his work as representative in the House of Representatives, he authored the resolution adopting the name, renaming rather, the South China Sea as the West Philippine Sea, which is, has been adopted and implemented by the Philippine government hanggang naging mas chino ho yung ating presidente. He is currently the International Adjunct Professor of Sociology at the State University of New York at Binghamton, which he says means that he spends 2 months abroad. He is more based in Bangkok with his family. He is an author and co-author of 25 books, with the last two being very interesting titles, so let's all look this up. One being Counter-Revolution, The Giant Rise of the Far Right, and the second being Paper Dragons, China and the Next Crash. Let's welcome Dr. Walden Bello. Okay, dyan na pala. And then we have two reactors, no? The first is Jeric Abella, who is the campaigner covering the Philippines and Malaysia for Amnesty International, covering East and Southeast Asia and the Pacific region. So, he's here na ba? There, Jerry. And then our second reactor is someone we all know very well, John Nery, very long-time associate editor of the Philippine Daily Inquirer, the largest newspaper in the Philippines. He was associate editor for so long, he no longer remembers when he started. But he retired in November 2018, but remains a steady columnist, stimulating our minds, our hearts, nurturing our souls every Tuesday. He sits and represents the Inquirer Group in the executive board of the Asia News Network and is a member of the board of the World Justice Program. So they are all here. One of our speakers and our two reactors. So we will start. As I said, our first presenter will be coming over by video. He is Richard Anderson Falk, who is the Albert G. Mitbank Professor Emeritus of International Law at Princeton University and a visiting distinguished professor in Global and International Studies of the University of California, Santa Barbara. He has served in various capacities in independent human rights inquiries, especially in relation to Kosovo, Ethiopia, and Liberia in the Southwest African case, and Palestine. So we listen to Professor Falk.
Good afternoon. I salute all who have convened and are participating in this international forum on lawfare, and wish that I could have been with you in person to share the experience. The title of the conference accurately identifies the core of the challenge faced by the people of the Philippines. The prolonged detention and framing of Senator Laila de Lima, not only a brave and dedicated political figure, but an elected member of the Senate of the Philippines, is a shocking reminder of how abuses of power occur in a country that claims to be a constitutional democracy. Senator de Lima's tragic saga gives an anguished concreteness to the challenge being mounted by the Duterte government against the freedom of expression and associated rights of political dissent. What this pattern represents, above all, is the distorted application of law and the manipulation of basic institutions of government. Law does not serve its proper role as protecting the citizen against abuse by the state, but rather functions as an instrument of naked power deployed by the state against notable critics and opposition figures, including persons elected to the highest offices of the land. Law becomes an instrument of the authoritarian designs of an oppressive political leader. Such a leader views criticism not as part of the essential give and take of a political democracy, but rather as an unacceptable assault on his leadership. It is against this background that I wish to offer some thoughts on lawfare as a weapon of the powerful, not in its appropriate role as a source of restraint to ensure the just exercise of power, but as an inquisitorial tool used to suppress Senator de Lima, a revered and previously leading member of legislative activity in the Philippines. There are four preliminary observations that I wish to make. First, what is happening in the Philippines, it is a global trend that threatens not only democracy, but the protection of human rights, the constitutional structure of government based on checks and balances, the dignity of individual citizens, and the independence of persons elected to serve in the government. Law is being deployed as a weapon of government to be used against the citizen, especially against persons with political credibility and stature, as is the case with Senator de Lima. Secondly, such repressive uses of law by leaders is not new, although its widespread and flagrant use by democratically elected governments that enjoy popular support among the citizenry is a new and deeply disturbing phenomenon. Thirdly, and most significantly, lawfare as such should not be uncritically condemned, but rather its use as a means to deny basic rights should be unconditionally exposed, opposed, and rejected. The manipulation of lawfare to serve regressive ends is perverse when lawfare has the potential, when properly deployed, to be used in the pursuit of justice. It is important to distinguish between such contradictory roles of law, as repressive and as emancipatory. Fourthly, I will focus on its negative dimensions that pertain to the case before us, keeping in mind the potential role of lawfare's progressive relevance to Senator de Lima's plight. During the Marcos reign of power in the Philippines, I worked closely with Walden Bello to organize a session of the Permanent People's Tribunal in Brussels that carefully documented the crimes of the Marcos government as perpetrated against the citizenry of the country. The published version of the tribunal produced a devastating record of abuse of state power, which, when published, helped prepare the atmosphere for what later became the People's Power movement of the mid-1980s. In terms of lawfare, this civil society initiative was an example of progressive lawfare. Such formats have been used in many settings around the world to exhibit the abusiveness of a particular government. The reliance by autocracies on repressive lawfare is neither surprising nor new, although this terminology was not often used in the past. Although there have been aspects of constitutional legal orders that have relied on repressive uses of law, for instance, apartheid South Africa, which possessed a constitutional framework to validate its exploitation and oppression of non-whites and their exclusion from civil rights. In recent years, especially in the aftermath of the 9/11 attacks, national security discourse in the United States has been a battleground for contesting ideas about how lawfare was used and misused. National security hawks contending that according due process protection to those suspected of terrorist activities was lawfare interfering with national security imperatives. In sharp disagreement, civil libertarians invoked law and civil rights to oppose and denounce the demonization of Muslims and the accompanying denial of rights to those accused of criminal activities that supposedly endangered national security. The mass internment of Japanese as a group with legal residence in the west coast of the United States for alleged national security reasons at the start of World War II, after the Pearl Harbor attacks, was a fundamental abuse of individual rights of due process by the U.S. government, but upheld by a majority of judges in the U.S. Supreme Court who proved complicit in this negative instance of lawfare. To this day, Japanese internment remains a major regrettable departure from the rule of law in the United States, later gathering apologies and expressions of regret from presidents and other political leaders. This kind of departure from the rule of law in wartime, although to be opposed in defense of democratic values, is something different and less serious than the lawfare tactics of autocratic leaders seeking to stifle dissent and discredit opposition in state-society relations. These tactics, if successfully, engulf all branches of government, having the effect of disabling democracy altogether. The regressive impact of such lawfare extends beyond the concrete abuse of individuals. However prominent, such tactics intimidate many more than they punish, and thereby act to pacify the whole society at the very time when the citizenry needs to be mobilized to protect the integrity of the system. Lawfare can be viewed either positively or negatively, depending on overall context and the motivations behind invoking law. Let me be clear, there is no ambiguity in relation to Senator De Lima's case. It is without doubt an extreme instance of negative lawfare. What we have around the world with the emergence of such leaders as Trump, Modi, Bolsonaro, Erdogan, and Duterte is this new phenomenon of democratically elected procedures elevating and even sustaining anti-democratic leaders despite their abuse of positions of preeminent authority to obstruct and punish those in the opposition by manipulating law and even the most basic governmental institutions to serve the purposes of power at the expense of justice. To explain why a particular action is taken or a specific accused person is framed to seem guilty by normal legal practice. Such tactics involve deliberate manipulations of law and government procedures, including the erosion and subversion of the vital independence of legislative and judicial institutions, and a design to cripple opposition politics by criminalizing its leading opponents. In the process, if unopposed and persistent, the very status of a constitutional political order is drawn into question. It seems clear that we are, in this case, seeking to protect not only Senator De Lima, but the people of the Philippines as a whole against regressive lawfare. There is little ambiguity when dissent is muffled by criminalizing the dissenter, as here, although the true nature of the accusation is hidden beneath clouds of false allegation of normal criminality. Senator De Lima has also been victimized by Duterte partisanship in the Senate, including being deprived of the opportunity to serve the people who elected her to office for a term that does not expire until 2022. She has been denied the right to vote on legislative issues and to participate in debates. Removed from her role as chair of the Committee on Justice and Human Rights in the Senate, an apparent retaliation for accusing the Duterte policies of unlawful extrajudicial executions of persons accused of dealing in drugs. While acting against Senator De Lima, she was attacked in unspeakably vulgar terms by Duterte supporters in language that was a vicious form of character assassination. The role of this forum in calling wider attention to the abuse of Senator De Lima by all branches of government is a vital challenge to the resilience of Filipino constitutionalism. We come now to the question of what is to be done under these circumstances. Responding to lawfare as effectively as possible depends in the first instance on assessing the context, above all the degree to which executive authority, judicial independence, and legislative autonomy are operating within constitutional limits. If the deviation from adherence to the rule of law is partial, exceptional, and seems reversible, then a maximum effort should be made to make intelligent use of formal legal procedures as provided. Such professional lawyering should be supplemented, to the extent possible, by media coverage and the engagement of academic experts that exposes the political nature of the misuse of law and mobilizes a sympathetic public opinion. Such extra legal pressure in a political system that maintains its claims of democratic legitimacy can be effective in persuading wavering judges to do the right thing. The challenge is more difficult where the institutions of government have been repeatedly subverted by the autocratic leader, and especially under conditions where the opposition media has been eliminated or cowed into submission, and popular protest activity is met by harsh police tactics. Earlier international efforts to mount petition campaigns by prominent citizens around the world in defense of a political prisoner are often successful, and still may be worthwhile in a case of this sort, where such a respected and prominent elected official is being victimized by lawfare. Autocracy is almost always a matter of degree, especially if free elections remain. If opposition politics are tolerated, then it is possible to challenge the system effectively. This in turn may lead the government to restore some liberal features of governance. Autocrats prefer to act in the dark, using their control over media and supporters to smear opponents. Senator De Lima's case is an extreme example of law gone wrong, a pattern of injustice being challenged to the extent possible by a courageous and highly professional lawyer. But this may not be enough. Other courses of action, including progressive lawfare, should be under consideration if further failures to render justice on behalf of Senator De Lima should occur. It is a sign of some democratic resilience in the Philippines that a conference of this kind can be organized and go forward. It will be a test of sorts as to whether the Duterte government will extend its use of regressive lawfare to uphold the suppression of dissent and criticism. In my reading of the legal briefs and documents pertaining to Senator De Lima's case, I'm convinced of her innocence and her victimization. She also has the high-profile support of such a warrior of human rights and democracy known the world over as Walden Bello. I fervently wish Senator De Lima a bright future of the sort that her struggle deserves. It has been a privilege for me to have this opportunity to participate in this forum. I wish you all the best.
So we thank Dr. Falk for having prepared a very substantial piece. The original video sent was 30 minutes, so that's been cut in half in the documentation. I think the whole piece will be put there. But let me just outline some things, accent some things that were especially meant to address our question of what happens now. Of course, he says that, as was discussed this morning, there is positive and there is negative lawfare. But he says very clearly, when dissent is criminalized, that is always wrong. And that is the case with Senator De Lima. But he also says it's very important to understand context. So when we plan our actions, it's important to understand context. Because he says, when the lawfare being practiced is partial, exceptional, paminsan-minsan lang, or seems reversible, ibig sabihin, meron ka pang paraan na maituwid ito, then the maximum use of formal legal procedures still makes sense. You still make use of legal procedures, but use plenty of media coverage and use the academe to help to explain to the people why the borders of the law are being violated. Second, he says, when the political opposition is still being tolerated, there is still a way of fighting lawfare by putting influence, letting our thoughts be known to the legal practitioners. So there's still that. But when the institutions of government have been repeatedly subdued by an autocratic leader, ganun ho ba sa atin? Yes, kung ganun na, sabi niya, yan ang mahirap. Yan ang mahirap tugunan. And so we are there. But he says, important therefore to understand the context, when you can still use legal procedures and when you have to be more creative, because it is a bigger fight, more difficult fight. So our second speaker now, Dr. Bellion.
Good afternoon. I am speaking here as for two organizations, Laban ng Masa, of which I am the national chairperson, and also as a member of a board of the ASEAN Parliamentarians for Human Rights. It's a bit difficult to come after Professor Richard Falk, since he's been recognized as one of the leading specialists in international law. He has also been a victim of lawfare. He was the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Palestinian rights, and he was never allowed by Israel to enter Palestine. And of course, as you can see, he is in very perfect health. Professor Falk is 89 years old, and he still plays tennis every day. So I will not spend much time here, since the speakers on the panel have so much more to say about lawfare than me. I just wanted to share a few thoughts that are more political, psychological than legal in nature. That is, I will touch on the psychological warfare that has been waged against Senator De Lima. I was wondering why at the beginning of Senator Lila's current odyssey, there were not more people who stood up for her. I think I would attribute this to what I termed elsewhere as Duterte's blitzkrieg fascism. While on the ground level, Duterte's panzers, or tanks, rolled over barangays indiscriminately killing people, at the national level, Duterte and his minions, like the abominably ambitious or simply abominable Richard Gordon, focused their massive firepower on Senator Lila. Both at the ground level and at national level, the aim of Duterte's panzers was to demonstrate the power of the administration to do anything it wanted and communicate that resistance was futile. True, the persecution of Senator Lila was to Duterte partly a settling of personal scores, the guys getting back at her for daring to investigate him for the Davao Death Squad killings. But probably more important, it was a campaign undertaken for what social psychologists would call its demonstration effect on the citizenry. Let me just share my thoughts on two of Duterte's blitzkrieg methods that proved so effective. One was the blatantly misogynistic line of attack, characterizing Senator Lila as, quote, an immoral woman, unquote. This was, in a very real sense, a witch hunt, a drive to paint this particular woman who had the gall to stand up to the omnipotent patriarch as the source of all society's evils. One must admit that it was a stroke of evil genius to dredge up Jurassic Age prejudices against women, the primordial worry about women leading men astray, that primeval fear that Freud called castration anxiety, and to link these male psychological terrors to the legal accusations that Senator Lila was a high-level enabler of the drug trade. Related to this misogynistic psychostrategy was the sheer effrontery of the effort to paint a former Secretary of Justice as being at the center of the country's illegal drugs problem. This panzer punch was so bold that it stunned people, and among many of those who did not know Senator Lila, it made them question their initial common sense or instinctive reaction that the accusation was false, utterly false. Now, those of us who knew Senator De Lima and had worked with her and had known firsthand her determination to combat injustice knew the accusations were nonsense. I had the opportunity to work with her briefly in pursuing cases against government officials abroad who were treating our OFWs as sexual prey when I was head of the House Representatives Committee on Overseas Workers' Affairs. And I was thoroughly impressed with her commitment to rectifying injustice. But for those who had not had the chance to work with her, the panzer punch was so outrageously bold that it psychologically destabilized them and made them question their initial reaction to dismiss the charges against Senator Lila as absurd. Now, those who did not know Senator Lila could perhaps be excused for being stunned by the lies of the president and his minions. And I am sure the good senator will not take this against them. But there were others who knew better, but were so worried that the same public crucifixion would happen to them that they remained silent or did not come out to defend her as strongly as they should have. I mention this not to make anyone feel guilty, but so we can understand why, despite their being fueled by falsehoods, Duterte's blitzkrieg tactics have been so effective in stunning people into inaction. But 3 years on, the panzers have run out of fuel. The blitz has lost its punch. The testimony of drug lords who are willing to admit to anything to escape the full force of the law is ridiculed and dismissed even by many pro-Duterte people. The prosecution is having a hell of a time trying to construct a case that would not be ripped apart or ripped to shreds during the first hours in court. Judge after judge has declined to hear the case because their reputations will be forever sullied by the image of them having presided over a kangaroo court. For them, the sight of septuagenarian Supreme Court justices hobbling towards the sunset, utterly discredited to their allowing themselves to become tools of a presidential whim and prejudice, that image, as most of them did in the case of Chief Justice Serrano, is a fate to be avoided at all costs. But most important, people are coming forward to bear witness to a grave injustice. I know several people who now make it a point to bring up Senator Lila's case with other people whenever the occasion presents itself. Let me quote one acquaintance here. Quote, "Whenever I ride a taxi these days, I make it a point to engage drivers on the political situation. And one of the things I talk to them about is the frame-up of Senator De Lima," unquote. Surely, slowly but surely, the tide is turning, if it has not already turned. I'm supposed to provide suggestions on what to do to advance Senator Lila's release. The legal suggestions I will leave up to our eminent lawyers. I will just mention non-legal initiatives. Bringing up the case of Senator Lila whenever we can, like my friend does with all sorts of people and in all sorts of occasions, is one way of spreading the truth. And with many of us doing this consciously as in a chain letter, this can work wonders. I just wanted to tell you that I spent part of the year in a country where things are not allowed to be said on the mass media or in newspapers about what is going on within a royal family. But I can tell you that whatever happens in the royal family, less than a day later, everyone in the country knows about it, and it is far faster than social media or newspapers. So basically, telling our friends and them telling their friends, etc., about what is happening is really a way of spreading the truth that is not to be underestimated. Then there is bringing up her case to friends and followers in social media. Of course, you'll get responses from the usual trolls. But from my experience over time, these level off while yeses and positive comments become more common. Let's just be thick-skinned and ignore the trolls. And from my experience, they trail off. Except, of course, in some cases, like that of Chair Chito Gascon, who provides a living for hundreds of trolls who are tasked with no other job than to watch and attack him day in and day out. For educators, Senator Laila is a profile in courage that deserves to be taught in civics classes to our students, even at the elementary level. For those of us who do a lot of public speaking, there is always a way to connect Senator Laila's case to your topic without it having the appearance of being pilit, even when you're talking about, say, globalization, social development, or the craziness of Donald Trump. Then there is the Free Laila Committee. It is simply waiting to be turned from a network into a mass movement, hindi ho ba? And perhaps it is this forum that will trigger this transformation. Perhaps at the highest rung of these modes of resistance is the Law Solidarity Hunger Strike, where hundreds, if not thousands, can join the senator in fasting for her release, following the example of Benigno Aquino. The second. Let us, however, have no illusions about the road ahead of us. Again, let me say that the key obstacle that needs to be surmounted is probably not legal, but psychological in nature. Even when they no longer believe in the charges against Senator Laila, many people may still be unwilling to acknowledge this even to themselves. On this phenomenon, let me offer the insights of Senator Laila herself in an interview I did with her when I posed the question of why Duterte remained so popular. And this is her answer. Quote, "That is the misconception we have about democracy. People feel invested in the person they supported, and they do not want to believe that he is capable of destroying an innocent human being, because if they admit that, they believe that they also have to admit they made the wrong choice. I think people aren't yet prepared for that dose of reality," unquote. Despite such obstacles, Senator Laila, the country's leading political prisoner, is confident that ultimately the truth will prevail. Since this is a symposium on lawfare, allow me to end by continuing to invoke the imagery of warfare. Though they were pummeled horribly for years by Hitler's panzers, through sheer will to preserve, the Russians turned the tide and their own tanks rolled all the way to Berlin. 3 years in jail have not broken Senator Laila. 10 more years won't break her. She perseveres in her belief in her ultimate vindication and in her trust that we are the instruments of that vindication, her avenging angels, if you will. Let us prove ourselves worthy of that trust. Thank you very much.
So thank you to our two speakers, one of whom gave a more international perspective and the use of institutions, including the law itself. And here at home, what we can do, from just talking about her to social media, to the role of education. And handa na ho ba tayong mag-hunger strike dyan? Malapit na ang Lent. Baka pwedeng pagplanuhan, uunahan ho ni Walden. Okay, so we now have our reactors, and our first reactor is Jerry.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to the speakers, Professor Bello, for your most illuminating messages. I would also like to thank the organizers of this forum for allowing Amnesty International the opportunity to participate. Indeed, the phenomenon of lawfare has posed a veritable challenge to human rights defenders and activists here in the Philippines and all the world over. As our distinguished speakers have correctly pointed out, one proof of this is the unremitting persecution being faced by the ever-brave Senator Laila de Lima, whom Amnesty considers a prisoner of conscience. Actually, I have here just one of the several dozens of postcards containing messages of support for and solidarity with the senator all the way from the US. Amnesty International USA initiated the postcard drive, and I'll be sure to hand these over to our friends from the Center's team later today. And yes, as we speak, many other prisoners of conscience are deprived of their freedom by their governments in various parts of the world: Vietnam, Saudi Arabia, China, and Russia, just to name a few. Through research and campaign, Amnesty International continues to draw attention to the deplorable situation of these prisoners of conscience, to pressure the authorities to drop all politically motivated charges against them and order their immediate and unconditional release. Some people look at the law as precisely and inherently a weapon, a tool constantly wielded by governments to subjugate and negate ideologies that do not conform to the dominant system. But the law, as Professor Falk incisively argues, is a double-edged sword. As is sometimes the case with power, while it subdues and oppresses, the law nevertheless provides spaces for negotiation. Amnesty International and many other groups, for example, reference domestic and international guarantees relating to civil and political rights when discussing the situation of Senator De Lima or of human rights defenders in general who are harassed, attacked, and vilified solely on the basis of their peaceful and legitimate work. The research group IBON, as I understand, has also filed a complaint before the Office of the Ombudsman against government and military officials who have been red tagging them or accusing them and many other groups and individuals of links to communist groups without credible evidence. In their complaint, IBON cited as their basis the Ombudsman Act of 1989 and the Code of Conduct and Ethical Standards for Public Officials and Employees. These are just a few examples of how the law can likewise be used to promote respect for and protect people's freedoms. I understand, though, that such a recourse carries with it certain limitations. There is, of course, the question of judicial independence, or of whether or not domestic courts have the courage and the ability to rule in favor of human rights defenders in the face of increasing government pressure. There is as well the issue of limited funding for legal action that targeted groups have versus the unlimited resources of the state. A possible remedy, for example, is by strengthening these organizations' capacity to initiate complaints and counter charges, including by supporting lawyers' groups that come to their defense often on a pro bono basis. This is not at all to say that when the law is weaponized against certain groups of people, the only recourse is the law itself. In an oft-referenced essay, writer and activist Audre Lorde powerfully sums it up, to quote, "For the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. They may allow us to temporarily beat him at his own game, but they will never enable us to bring about genuine change," unquote. The point I wanted to make thus is how human rights defenders can and must continue to harness the power and potency of solidarity. Often, the bigger and more important battle is not within the court, but in communities, in spaces inhabited by the people from whom we draw constant inspiration and strength. As mentioned by Professor Bello, we must grab each chance we get to explain to people how the current dispensation has been mobilizing its various agencies to undermine our rights and freedoms at every opportunity. The thousands killed during abusive anti-drug operations by the police, unrelenting attempts to muzzle media organizations like Rappler and ABS-CBN, and stifle freedoms of speech, expression, and access to information. Countless human rights defenders and activists being harassed, attacked, arbitrarily arrested, and even killed. It is equally imperative as well that we listen to people's thoughts and insights and take these into account in the hopes of actually reaching them and helping them activate that side of them that is more compassionate, more humane, and more conscious and assertive of their rights, both as individuals and as Filipinos. The students here, for example, can begin by taking active part as members and supporters of human rights organizations in the country. Ultimately, in the face of government repression on practically all fronts, the struggle can be won through decisive collective action. Thank you.
So thank you for the perspective from Amnesty International about individual actions that can also be organized and on a community level. We now hear from our second reactor, John Nery.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Allow me to respond to not only the topic of this plenary session, but also to the themes of the entire program. This has been a thrilling day. I've been following since morning on live stream. The first international conference on lawfare. But one disadvantage of being first, we have spent a lot of time wrestling with definitions. What exactly, several hours later, do we say to the question, do we answer to the question, what exactly does lawfare mean? This is an important exercise, but it can also be confusing. Professor Falk's anatomy of lawfare, negative and positive, I think would be an important step forward. I would like to suggest, and I hope that we can all agree, that we can gain clarity by asking a parallel question. Why are we talking about lawfare now? If the weaponization of the rule of law has been a brutal fact in history, why is it a strategy that today's authoritarians use? As Professor Falk notes, and our speakers this morning proved, we are experiencing a global trend of democratic backsliding. But instead of a sudden, swift collapse into authoritarianism, we are suffering a slow, gradual democratic erosion. Why? Because today's authoritarians have learned their lessons. They know that constructing a democratic facade can prolong their hold on power. That's where we are now. How do we combat lawfare? I don't have specific suggestions in mind, but I would like to recommend a framework for thinking about capacity building. I will borrow Zeynep Tufekci's framework for capacity building in social movements. We need to develop three strengths: the narrative capacity, the disruptive capacity, and the electoral capacity. Allow me to quote her. Narrative capacity refers to the ability of the movement to frame its story on its own terms, to spread its worldview. And the fact that Lawfare PH has trended gives us a taste of what it means to be able to push our story and let other people share our perspective. We might think of narrative capacity as persuasion or legitimacy, key ideological pillars of any social movement. Disruptive capacity describes whether a movement can interrupt the regular operations of a system of authority. So Dr. Bello's idea that maybe it is time to go on a hunger strike, I think illustrates that point. I think back to April 1976, 77, when we had the noise barrage. Perhaps it's time to try that again. If you have doubts about the surveys, this might be a way to show that people are in fact behind Senator De Lima. To resume, finally, electoral or institutional capacity refers to a movement's ability to keep politicians from being elected, re-elected, or nominated unless they adopt and pursue policies friendly to the social movement's agenda or the ability to force changes in institutions. Let me end on something that Dr. Bello noted, that combating warfare requires probably a psychological adjustment rather than anything else. And perhaps we can hurdle that psychological barrier by thinking in terms of this three-fold framework. We need to build our narrative capacity, change the story. We need to build our electoral capacity. And I'm very glad that Ana Santos earlier made a special mention of Chel Jokno's brilliant showing in the last election. But lastly, we need to build our disruptive capacity to signal to the powers that be the strength of the democratic resistance. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It is with great regret that we have to put this panel to a close. I think I'd like to say that this panel is not standalone. It should have also connected with, I think, were probably a lot of ideas that came out from the breakout groups, and definitely in the documentation, we will want to bring all of that in. So we had a big view of strategies and responses, both personal, the familiar, just talking to people about it, to creative actions that are disruptive, to looking at the institutions, what do politicians do, what do legislators do, what does the court, what does media do, and then a framework that will affect, so we're saying it cannot just be legal, it cannot just be technical, it needs to be psychic. So the framework of narrative, disruptive, and electoral, especially with 2022 not being so far away. So again, thank you. We hope it will be a continuing process. Let me also just say that there will be a sort of follow-up forum that will be coming up with Inside Gov and the World Justice Program, of which John is a board member. We will be holding a conference on a launch of the Rule of Law Index. For the first time, the global index is going to be launched here. And we will be doing a continuing conversation to look at the 9 pillars of the rule of law, because that is something we need to understand better. Because as was brought out in this panel, we need to act, but we need to understand the definitions better. We need to understand the concepts better. We need to understand context better. So again, fitting last panel for this. We've talked a lot, we've thought a lot, and now we're thinking about how we march forward. Because lawfare cannot be the rule of our times. Thank you very much.
March forward because lawfare cannot be the rule of our time. The task and challenge of changing the narrative is upon us all, and perhaps we can begin that by using our hashtag, which is being flashed on screen now. A while ago, we trended on Twitter, and hopefully after this, the conversation will continue, and eventually, we will be able to change the narrative. Our next message will come from a woman who has been called many horrible names by our president. She is the UN Special Rapporteur on extrajudicial, summary, and arbitrary killings. And to read the message of Agnes Calamard, I would like to present to you Honorable Samira Gutok, former member of the Bangsamoro Transition Commission.
Hello, everyone. everyone. Nervyos ako, taga-UN to eh. Dear friends, colleagues, human rights defenders, dear Senator Laila de Lima, I am sorry I cannot be there in person, but I am with you in spirit and solidarity to celebrate the resilience of the people of the Philippines and the courage of the families of victims of the war on drugs, human rights defenders, lawyers, priests, journalists, artists, political activists, and elected representatives. I have often said that over the last 3 years, I will say it again this evening, you have been my inspiration since I was appointed Special Rapporteur on extrajudicial, summary, or arbitrary executions on 1 August 2016. Your conviction, determination, the social movements and coalition that you have set up across your differences, the independent media and journalism exemplified by your reporting on the front line of the war on drugs, and the capacity of these many Philippine actors and movements to innovate and think ahead of their peers around the world and frame the challenges we are all confronting. Today's event is no exception. But we have entered a new era. We are confronting a new phenomena. What to do when laws, which have served the people for years not perfectly, but somewhat well enough, what to do when these laws appear to be emptied of their original meaning, when they no longer protect, but are used to harm individuals and the society at large. They are turned upside down, their spirit and letter weaponized for the purpose of crushing dissent and the dissidents, independent reporting, and independence of the mind. And the skeleton meant to make our society strong is now eating at it, making us weak. How do we fight back? How do we protect society against the misuse of that which was supposed to make it strong, resilient, and sustainable? For them, we have to turn to our focus on the institutions, on the people, and on the tripartite system of lawmaking, law enacting, and law protection. Hindi acting, law enacting and law protection. For these laws which are turned against us, we will have to fight one case at a time, one indictment at a time, one trial at a time. We will have to fight one wrongly imprisoned person at a time, one Senator Laila de Lima at a time, one abuse of power at a time, one lie at a time. In such a fight, the protection of freedom of expression and information, of independent media and journalism will be key, as will the protection of the independence of the judiciary, the protection of a legal culture that understands the functions of the law, the primacy of the rule of law over the rule by law. On this journey, you can count on me and many others around the world because your fight is our fight too. It is the fight in many of our societies, and it is our fight internationally. International law, too, is turned upside down, ignored, flouted, weaponized at great expense for the people, the most vulnerable people. And let's make no mistake, the only possible outcome of international lawfare is war. So on this journey, we are all there, united, in the fight for our societies, national and international, insisting that norms, standards, and values matter and count, demanding that they be protected, not ignored, and fighting back, one weaponization at a time, because we can, because we have to. Message by Agnes Calamard, United Nations Special Rapporteur on extrajudicial, summary, or arbitrary killings.
Maraming salamat, Samira. As the good rapporteur said, this is war, and we have to fight in the trenches of the imagination of the people. At this point, we will have a message and a reflection from an alternative lawyer, the view and insights from the ground. Our speaker is a human rights and child rights advocate, the national coordinator of the Alternative Law Group Secretariat, a community organizer, and a lawyer. Please welcome Attorney Sheila Grace A. Formento.
Men rumble through Smoky Mountain homes. Darkness indeed, justice dressed in gloom.
to our guests and participants, good afternoon. Okay pa po ba kayo? Okay. Our organization, the Alternative Law Groups, strives to promote greater access to justice and uphold human rights through the developmental use of law and the critical engagement of the legal system. We are a coalition of 18 legal resource organizations working with the poor, marginalized sectors, identities, and communities. I am here today to share our view from the ground and our insights as alternative lawyers. If I may say, we live in critical times. Populism and even fascism penetrate the way the current administration operates. Since the beginning of President Duterte's administration, this government has conveniently put the blame on persons who use drugs for all the ills of society. They have waged a relentless war on drugs, killing thousands of people, destroying families, leaving widows and orphans in its wake. Human rights defenders are also constantly under threat. Those who dissent are harassed, threatened, and jailed. Organizations are being red-tagged as communist fronts and is slowly shrinking healthy democratic space for civil society organizations. In this current situation, why then would a lawyer of sound mind venture into human rights practice and public interest litigation? Why protect the interests of the poor and marginalized when you can get a fat paycheck from corporations who exploit them? As lawyers, why should we expose ourselves to unnecessary risks when we are not even affected by the killings? The privileged lawyer or law student thinks no one I know has been killed, and those who died are probably guilty anyway. Indeed, why practice alternative lawyering? I tell you why. To stop the erosion of democracy, slowly our freedom is being taken away, all for the sake of an ambiguous concept called national security. Ironically, some of the perpetrators of these crimes are those who are supposed to provide security to ordinary citizens. Now, our challenge as an organization, first, is to encourage lawyers, especially the new members of the Philippine Bar, to do alternative lawyering. And if not, at least handle public interest cases. I remember my former boss telling me when President Duterte was elected, and then we knew what's going to happen, she was telling me, magrarally pa ba ako? Medyo magsi-senior citizen na ako. Hindi ko na ata kaya. I told her, don't worry, maglalagay tayo ng priority lane sa mga pwesto. Kidding aside, what's my point here? We need new lawyers. We need new human rights defenders. Hindi lang new, pero mga bata. Why? Kasi yung sistema o yung pamamaraan na ginagamit, bago na rin. Social media, trolls. Ako nga, hindi ako masyadong nagtitwitter, di ba? So we need ang mga bagong abogado at human rights defenders. I am privileged to work alongside people who have worked hard and dedicated their entire careers to promoting the rule of law and social justice. There are a lot of issues threatening our communities, the environment, and our human rights, but the number of human rights defenders is diminishing. Yung iba, nagkakaedad na, tulad ng aking dating boss. The law profession entails duty to public service as its primary consideration. And what better way to fulfill that duty than to do public interest cases to promote social justice? Our second challenge, to encourage rights holders to make legitimate claims of their rights. The constant threat and harassment of the communities have affected their participation and interest in filing cases against people and corporations that violate their human rights. Our paralegals and community leaders who are working directly on the ground are exposed to risk of reprisal and abuse of the legal process. They are members of the community, and a marginalized sector who can't afford quality legal services. If we cease to keep fighting the good fight, then our freedom will vanish right before our eyes. Human rights defenders are potential partners in development, not enemies of the state. Hence, my call is simply this: to preserve the rule of law and to preserve the integrity and independence of the judiciary, catering not only to the powerful few, but to the rest of us who need it the most. Magandang hapon po.
Marami pong salamat, Attorney Sheila. To say that this is a historic day is an understatement. And I'm sure that the next person that I will introduce will have a very tough job of providing the synthesis of our processes today. For the synthesis and closing remarks, I would like to present to you the former Dean of the Ateneo School of Government, a lawyer, an environmental and human rights advocate, and currently Dean of the Polytechnic University of the Philippines College of Law. Friends, please welcome Dean Tony Lavinia.
Correction, I'm not Dean of the Polytechnic University of the Philippines College of Law. I'm just a professor there. So please, I'm actually just a professor. I retired a few years ago to just concentrate on teaching, and if the world didn't have any problems, I'd just be teaching and doing a little bit of writing. It's a tough job, as you said, but I do this a lot because I teach in 12 universities in all over the country, and people ask me, why do you do that? How do you do that? Well, because I actually don't do a lot of things. My students do everything. And at the end, I just synthesize what I hear from them. So my students would know that. They do moot courts, they do negotiations, they do activities, and at the end, I talk for 10 minutes to summarize everything for them. So I'll limit this to 10 minutes because I think we need to finish as well, and people are also tired, and we have to have our energy. So please bear with me. I have 3 points to make for this synthesis. First, just to thank everyone, to make sure we're able to thank everyone. I have to say I was very thrilled listening to Richard Falk earlier. Those of you, especially law students here, that's a superstar in public international law, one of the most progressive, one of the most brilliant lawyers, and also quite knowledgeable about the Philippines, as he mentioned, way back to the 70s and the 80s when he organized with Walden the Permanent People's Tribunal, which was something very influential also in my thinking on what was happening in the Philippines during martial law. But of course, Richard is just one of the many international colleagues that have given messages, help us understand what we're facing, gave solitary messages to Senator Laila de Lima. We have with us today, spending time with us, flying from different places, Ms. Musuchwa of Cambodia, Marina Meshure of France, and we also had Jayanti Devubalagaru of India, who's a women lawyer and leader of women's lawyers who came and shared their thoughts with us. We also heard from our Hong Kong colleagues, Joshua Wong and Emily Lau. We heard from eminent professors, 2 special rapporteurs, David Kay and the last Agnes Calamard over here, and I think another one from Hong Kong that we also heard earlier. So thank you very much to all our international colleagues for being with us and for also making us understand that this is not just us. It's not just us that's facing this problem of lawfare, but it's a shared problem, and therefore the solutions can actually also be shared. Of course, I'd like to thank everyone who spoke, who facilitated, who gave their time here. We had senators here, we had representatives, both former and current representatives, quite a number of them. I won't mention and list the names, so I might forget some of them. Sectoral leaders, youth, the poor, LGBT, Muslims. We have quite a number of sectoral leaders as well that came here. Those who are actually suffering from lawfare directly, we heard from Maria Ressa, we heard from Senator Sani Trillanes, who are both facing lots of cases. We had Father Albert, Father Flavi, who are facing charges also. Those who cannot be here because of lawfare, Senator De Lima, of course, has been a very big presence from the beginning in planning this conference, in giving her keynote address, in people addressing her situation, given that this is also the 3rd-year anniversary of her unjust detention. I would say there are those also, especially young people who are not here because they're subjected to lawfare, those who are detained or arrested because of charges like illegal possession of firearms, which we know has no basis. Now, those of us who have been lawyering for them, I lawyer for one of them, Miles Albasin, in Negros. The UP5, the Taclob, the Leyte 5 is the latest of those groups of people that have been subjected to lawfare through unjust persecution, to planting of evidence. Of course, those who really cannot be here because they're no longer with us, because they've been victims of physical violence itself. We have the family, of course, of the victims of the extrajudicial killings, and we're very grateful that you spent time with us to share your experience. I know that the wife of Ben Ramos, one of our colleagues, human rights colleagues who was assassinated in Negros, Ayesha, is also here. I think it's important also to remember those who cannot be here and cannot be here because of what has been done to them. The youth, I'd like to give special attention. I'm very happy that you have so many young people, not just law students, but also undergrad students, some from far away. Trisha and Mel of Ateneo de Naga, where are you? I met them earlier. And others from Ateneo de Naga, sent by their dean. Thank you very much for coming all the way from there. My PUP students who came in full force, my students from UP, DLSU, and others as well have been here. This is really also for you because this battle is what I call an intergenerational battle. As Chell pointed out, Dean Chell pointed out, lawfare is not a new thing. It's just escalated, and it has gotten into different forms. So, of course, the Secretariat, the staff, especially of Senator De Lima, and all those that have volunteered, I think we owe them a strong word of gratitude for the work that has been done in getting this successful conference. My second point is actually the substance, but because I have a very long matrix for the substance, and will take me quite a while to proceed to explain that, instead of doing the substance in detail, what I would propose is the process by which we finalize the output of this conference. We would like to come up with a conference statement, conference declaration. The structure of our process, it was not possible to come up with a draft now, given that there was such a rich discussion from the plenaries to the smaller discussions, the breakout groups that we have. So our suggestion is to, if you could mandate the Secretariat, following the structure of the conference, what is lawfare, understanding what it is. We have very many insights from our speakers, from CJ Sereno to Dean Agabin and others that spoke in those first sessions, to the experience of living lawfare and fighting lawfare. I really thought, for example, that Dean Chal Jokno's reflections on what we did during martial law is something that's very instructive of what we can do today. And then all the way down, I made it a point to go around the different group discussions. We've been able to capture all of that in this matrix, including action points. And my sense, as I went around and listening to the discussions in the smaller groups, this is not, we are not defeated. Now we know that we can actually win this, that this is not going to be forever. But, you know, changing it requires action. It also won't change by just us waiting for it to change. So I could see that in all of the discussions, very concrete suggestions were given, and we were able to capture that, and we'll try to put that into writing, and then send it particularly to the groups and the representatives of all the groups that were present here for approval or for feedback before we finalize it. Obviously, we would not put anyone or any group as signatories unless they actually agreed to do that. That's important as well in terms of the process. The third point and final point I would like to say is, of course, the call for action. That is really what this is all about. I mean, of course, this is an academic conference because we wanted to understand this phenomenon of lawfare in its current expression. But the purpose of understanding was to learn how to fight it, combat it in all its multiple ways of expression, in the multiple fronts that it expresses itself. I actually wrote my column for tomorrow in Manila Standard while the conference was going on, and I following the use of the virus language. I mean, just said combating the virus that could be a pandemic or maybe even a pandemic already called lawfare. They're very different virus, but can be even more challenging. It actually kills people, as we know, as it killed victims of extrajudicial killings and political activists. So the point of understanding is to be able to fight it smartly and effectively in multiple fronts. Above all, in all the discussions I've heard today, the one takeaway that I have is that the guarantee to win this fight is to create a broad coalition of all of us. That's really what's necessary. Because all of us are going to be, and we see that both sectors, whether it's sectors or ideologies or whatever differences that we have, we can all be targeted by lawfare. And so as you know, as diverse as our views are, it's important to create a broad coalition with principles, based on principles and based on a common understanding. So hopefully this conference will create this understanding, this common understanding of what we are faced with, and we'll try to capture that in the conference document. But the coalition like that can only be effective also if we know what we will seek to do in that coalition. And here I will get from borrow from John his 3 points, particularly the creation of narratives, disruptive action, and also eventually some kind of a cooperation, collaboration for electoral objectives. The narrative change is not only sort of changing the understanding and helping the people understanding what's happening, but also to propose alternatives to the narratives that the people, the groups that are benefiting from this lawfare is proposing. We have to have alternatives to that. I think, and Walden was able also to point that out, very important to build their own digital communities. People that have been listening to me on this point have been saying that the strength of the other side is they actually have very strong digital communities, small digital communities that's constantly fed. And we have to have alternatives to those communities, and also that needs to be constantly fed the narratives that we want to feed to them, and we should be able to do that. But I would say that over the medium term, because we do have an election coming in 2022, at some point we would have to think about how to create a broad electoral coalition to make sure that our vision of society, where lawfare is a good thing, because lawfare, the positive thing of lawfare is we can weaponize the law for social justice. We can weaponize the law for access to justice. We can weaponize the law for national sovereignty. That is the vision that we have. So with that, I thank you all, and thank you very much also for the presence here.
Maraming salamat po, Dean Tony. Pwede po bang tumingin kayo sa katabi nyo sa kanan? Kanan, pakisabi maraming salamat. Tumingin po tayo sa kasama natin sa kaliwa. Pakisabi po, maraming salamat, naging bahagi ka na kasaysayan. Again, we would like to acknowledge our presenters, De La Salle University, Alternative Law Groups, Human Rights and People Empowerment Center, Rappler, Committee for the Freedom of Leila M. De Lima. Mga kababayan, this is an International Forum on Lawfare, Weaponizing the Law Against Democratic Dissent. Stop Lawfare. Tumayo po tayong lahat para sa pag-awit ng bayan ko. This morning, I've said in the opening, where there is darkness, let there be. May I request everyone, as we sing bayan ko, let there be light.
Ang bayan kong Pilipinas, lupain ng ginto't bulaklak, pag-ibig na sa kanyang pala, nag-alay na ganda tila, at sa kanyang yumi at ganda, dayuhan ay nahalina. Bayan kong binihag ka, nasa laksa dusa. Ibon mamaylayang lumipad, kulungin mo at umiiyak. Bayan pa kayang sakdal dilag, ang di magnasang makaalpas. Pilipinas kong minumutya, pugad ng luha at dalita. Aking adhika, makita kang sakdalaya.
Mabuhay po tayong lahat. Magandang hapon sa ating lahat.